like student protests. I don't know. I guess I was wondering.
The new proletarians.
From the perspective of somebody who's lived through multiple of these sorts of things, and as somebody who's in higher education, how often does this work, and what does it do in the broader scheme of the country and the actual cause that they're trying to? Because what they're trying to do is impact the university, and then what does that actually do for the cause?
Many different answers. That is, each university in each country in each time period can be very, very different. You know, Hong Kong, for example, was highly politicized, highly covered by international media, and at least from my, I don't have personal original fieldwork, but simply the media has said that it began as a local, narrow administration of Hong Kong kind of issue, and the students were not asking for anything big or very, certainly nothing revolutionary. But over time, the students, leaders themselves, they have said about it, at least in interviews reported by the New York Times and the Western Press, they gradually, it grew into a broader and more general movement, and it became an anti-establishment, meaning the Beijing, China national government became challenged, and eventually, are those students actually going to depose the Beijing government? Of course not. I mean, there are a couple of dozen students, but nevertheless, the goals, the rhetoric, and so forth did change, and so I'm simply saying. By contrast, in 1 week, I think it was roughly in 1 week in Cairo, the so-called, they gave the name the Green Revolution, the president of the country resigned. The students were demonstrating. Okay, I'll give up being president of Egypt. Okay, who would have imagined that? I mean, it practically never had happened before in the history of the world. You know, in Egypt, these people built pyramids. Do you think that they paid union wages to build those pyramids? They didn't have Caterpillar trucks. They had thousands and thousands of slaves who carried those pieces of stone. So, I mean, the sense of the military, the hierarchy, I mean, there's so many different social structures and technologies. They're all interpenetrating so that it would be, as analysts, we should not ask too simplistic a question or expect, or that is, in Washington, I've heard this many times. If you see a problem that is, and you state it as a clear problem, if you have a solution which is clear and coherent, it is inevitably wrong. So Aaron Veldovsky jumped in and he said he developed an alternative, which is a subfield within public administration and public policy called implementation. So he published a number of books called this. And he would show things by doing as he worked with a bunch of people in Oakland. He studied the city of Oakland right next to Berkeley. But he also studied, half of his career he worked in Washington. He studied the national government, how the national government and big national programs, changed and so forth. So then the idea of implementation is you trace how much of the U.S. Congress, the president, he said, we're now announcing a new program. We're going to end poverty in America. Okay, well, that's great. Let's end poverty in America. So what then Veldovsky would do is say, which are those specific programs? How are they supposed to be? Well, first they get transferred to different secretaries, different federal agencies. Each of those agencies has a different program. When they get to Oakland, then they have more agencies, and they have different staff, and then how much of it reaches citizens in a particular street. And basically what he shows is that there are huge changes. And so if we give a simple answer, we leave out all this stuff. It's tricky, complicated. Whether it's true, whether it's Hong Kong or Oakland.
So in what ways do you see this, like what's going on campuses right now, to be similar and different from the sort of protests that happened in the past? Like specifically like to Vietnam or something that we all kind of have some sort of historical basis.
I mean, but one major, two or three things. I mean, history is changing very fast, maybe very faster than ever before. So many people, so many smart people are more educated than they were. I mean, this is from '69. What year is that? That's 50 years ago. 50 years. This is half a century. There've been many changes. So much more egalitarianism, much more communication. People are in those tents. They know what's going on in Jerusalem. They know what's going on in Geneva. They know what's going on in Washington, etc. And then, not to mention, I don't know, the Iran, Iraq, Palestine. I mean, all these things are interpenetrating in different ways, in ways that make it much more complicated. I'll give one example. One more Chicago sociology PhD, a woman who she'd been an very smart English civil servant for about 25 years. She came to Chicago to get her PhD, and her PhD was she worked with me and Saskia Sassen, on globalization of civic activities, including revolutionary planning. These were mainly people from the Middle East and Black Africa who had gone to London. So she worked with them, fieldwork, ethnographic fieldwork for 2 to 3 years, meeting with these revolutionary leaders in different parts of Africa and in the Middle East. And they were killing people, etc. all the time in London. Not to mention that is a lot of these leaders are now in London and Paris. I told you about the two guys from Columbia. They didn't come here. They never went in the building. They knew if they went in there, they could get blamed, or they could get kicked out of the university and so forth. But there's so much more egalitarianism combined with the active that is. There's not one leader anymore. That is, there's so many different. I said briefly. I taught at Columbia a year before I came here. I trained the leading student Marxists in one. I mentioned this class. I mentioned only the other class. Did I mention it here? Did you mention it? Okay. I was still a grad student. I was finishing my PhD, but I taught a course. And there were about 25 students. And there was one older guy. The older guy came up to me after the first or second class. He said, "You know who's in this class?" I said, "No." And he said, "These are the top student leaders of the most radical left. Most of them are early Marxists, but they each have a different version of Marx. They each have their own organization. Some are called the red tankers, or the beer drinking. No, I shouldn't say they didn't feature beer. They featured revolution, violence, and Marx." And he said, "I was in the Navy, and I'm now here. I'm in Columbia. I'm retired. I try to help security people, but I don't know anything about Marx. And a lot of the students are trying to. And you were teaching in this class more about Marx than any other course on campus. And so they want to learn about Marx, and that's why they've come to you." So I didn't know that. We had good discussion, and the next year they burned down the university. So who knew that was going to happen? Nobody knew that. And I mean, lots of top faculty left Columbia, and alas, in that case, it did literally destroy the university. It was a top Ivy League, 4 or 5 top universities. And in sociology, it was either number one along with Berkeley and Harvard. And for 10 to 20 years, it dropped way down. It was disastrous.
So what do we make?
Architecture, planning, same thing happened. There are lots of very active students from architecture.
What do we make of the combination of the differences in university response and then also the police response to these things?
Sorry, whose response?
The universities,
Yeah.
and then also the police.
Now, but university, you mean the administration, the president? That is, I asked one quick follow-up. There's a story, I think, in the New York Times, which said they'd done a survey, some kind of survey, and they said who was who said there might be danger to the university, to Harvard, and several people said there could be a threat of violence, or someone could be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so they tried to follow that up, and the people who were saying this tended to be assistant deans. That is, they're not the president, they're not the faculty, they're not the deans, but they're sort of people, assistant deans, who are responsible or feel that they're responsible for keeping it calm. And I don't know beyond that, and I don't, now, again, I'm telling you what it came from national news media, etc. But in that sense, each person, each participant can make a difference in a dramatically big way, including you. Teaching assistants, I mean, young people, TAs were some of the most active people at Berkeley, and because, I mean, you're more sophisticated, you're less, not necessarily more fundamental, that is, you've had 4 years plus, whereas the grad students may be more professionalized, working toward their job in economics or business or something like that.
So I guess another thing is, because at least here you see people from maybe outside the university community coming to either support or to agitate. And so I don't know, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like, what do you make of that? The way in which it sort of attracts the broader community.
I'll give you an example. There was an assistant or associate professor of sociology, whose name will come back in a couple of minutes. He was in his office, which was in that little tower between the college library and the social science building, and he was working there afternoon at some point, sitting in his chair. Someone came up behind him, he didn't know he was there, and hit him over the head with some kind of sledgehammer and cracked part of his skull. I mean, he could have died, but he did live. But he happened to be, he was the campus leader of the faculty version of SDS, of the Students for the Democratic Society, SDS, major organization. That is, in '68, it was the leading organization nationally. And there was, I mean, they founded in Michigan and so forth. There's a lot of books about it and so forth. There's nothing like that today. We've got thousands, we've got hundreds of different little organizations doing different things. So, yeah, Richard Flax, F-L-A-C-K-S. After, being in the hospital for a while, he went to, I think, Santa Barbara, and was either Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara for the rest of his career. And he was on radio. He was a major student, or not student. Well, he'd been a student, but then he went on, became a faculty. He was a leader nationally. I think maybe he's the leader, one of the leading faculty counterparts of SDS. And he was, practically killed. So yes, I mean, it's worth worrying about. Now, I say, if we were in '69 or '68, that did happen. On the other hand, and so I think your question is an important one. How much is this USC students, or how much do we have people from wherever else? I don't know, but I'll give you one example. Who was a PhD student in the sociology department. He worked very actively with me and with Saskia Sassen. He was he was a brilliant guy, and he was Palestinian. He now is on the faculty at a branch of the theology school here, and about a few years ago, recently, he was awarded a prize for being a MacArthur Scholar. MacArthur, not just scholar, sorry. MacArthur, what's the term? Genius! He's a MacArthur official genius. You get something like $500,000 and so forth. He's probably 35. And he also had humor and irony, which very few of you were able to achieve. Okay. He lived in Palestine about half because he flew back and forth all the time. But he also knew he lived in a black neighborhood, and he knew the style of hip hop. He knew the songs, he knew the actors, and he could use the English language to rap in the classroom with fun and with humor that I think I've never seen before or since at this university, because he was so good at it. He could well be in one of those tents right now. But
So
on the other hand, he's a faculty member nearby right now.
So what is the role, because you see on other campuses faculty going out and either demonstrating with students or in some cases forming barriers around students, and you don't, at least from what I've seen, and it's only been a day or two, you don't see that here. You don't see the same kind of engagement. You didn't see it a couple months ago when they were doing their sit-in at the admissions building. So what is what do we make of that? What is the role of faculty in these demonstrations?
An excellent point, and you're behind your point is the bigger one, that the U of C is different. And I'm going back to you to 69 because the ethos, the underlying values were there back to 1945. That is, the battle in 1945, there was a battle between the faculty and President Harper. And so Harper wanted to, basically, they had a battle. They went to the trustees, and the trustees basically said, the faculty are right, and you have to pay attention to the president. So from 1945 through Edward Levy, and then it changed in the last 15, 20 years. The administration and the president have become more authoritarian and closer to the rest of the world, closer to most universities. Nevertheless, that background still has a sense of knowledge, research, and you do not have this battle between the faculty and the administration, as is common at Harvard, Berkeley, Columbia, and so on. I taught at Harvard. I taught at Harvard for 3 months, whatever it was. I had lunch with probably 90 people. 70 of those people, I would say, had taught at Chicago at some point in their careers. And they said, I really miss the University of Chicago. There's nothing like that anywhere else. People here, and this university is a lousy place. Harvard is a second-rate place. They tell you the fact, and then they tell nasty things that are nasty about what you have to do at Harvard and what's bad about it. That is, they badmouth all kinds of stuff unnecessarily about how bad Harvard was. They would say that I loved the University of Chicago when I was there, and I would have said I've been here almost my whole career. I've visitors. I've gone to many other places as visitor: Yale, Harvard, UCLA, University of Sorbonne, Florence, and I've often met people who've been as visitors something at the University of Chicago, and many will say, "I love the," and people here, many people still have said that in ways that others don't. And that is, I was surprised at how much critical people have been at Harvard. I mean, but I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, you can read about this in biographies and the New York Times interviews and so on, and look at the stuff which has just been on Harvard in the last 2 months. The faculty, at least as covered by the American press, the faculty are hating the president, and they drove her out. They said they found she plagiarized in her PhD. I mean, if it had only been the calling, first it was the congressional hearings led by a woman from Harvard BA graduate, from New York State. So she got the president there. Then she just said what she did. Then the press and others began to criticize her. But then you got more of the New York Times people. There was an interview, for instance, with the chairman of the anthropology department at Harvard, and said to the New York Times, quote unquote, we had three top candidates, and they were not women. And so the president, came to me and said, we want to have a woman, at least a woman who be either certainly on the list, and probably you should appoint her as a woman. I mean, that is, it wasn't that she wasn't even a candidate at all. And so the angry chairman of the anthropology department is being told, you've got to hire somebody else. That we've done a national search, we got letters, we've done all the right procedures. We've come through, we have three or so leading candidates. We're taking the dean, and here's our first, our second, our third, whatever. And then the president comes in and says, no, none of that is good. You don't have it. And so that kind of stuff doesn't happen in Chicago. I won't say it couldn't ever, but basically that kind of thing shows the alienation. Okay, that's maybe it's a food truck. But okay, I mean, somebody's got a loudspeaker, and maybe they're getting. That is, to answer your question, we may be getting more people from, national or people flying in from Stanford or Cambridge or New York who've been doing this. I don't know, and so that could well have occurred. And so how Richard Flax got almost killed? He could have been someone came from New York, and potentially killed him in his own office, so it may not have been anything to do with Chicago at all. But that is, and I'm telling you that because that terrible thing did happen even in my department, and I knew the situation, and I knew him well as a person. But none of this was written was planned or clear in advance. It changed, including in Paris. I mean, I met, I talked with people. I met with people who were trying to say, what should we do with Paris? And so the whole University of Paris had a bunch of this. It had one administrative apparatus under the Ministry of Education, and the position of each university was to be this and that. I mean, it's all officially planned and administered. But after '68, the sociology department was moved away from the social sciences and moved into part of the School of Medicine. That's it. So think that why, I have no idea.
So I could keep yapping. I could keep asking questions. If anybody else has anything they want to say? No? Maybe? No?
You're I won't say you're total. Have you been in this class session? No, okay, well, great. Welcome here. Want to tell us just a little bit about yourself? That's okay?
Yeah, my name is Kaya. I'm a third year. I'm studying business economics, and I'm minoring.
You say business
economics.
Okay.
And then I'm minoring in architecture, which is where this class kind of comes in for me. And yeah, I've taken a lot of CU classes before because I originally thought I was going to be the CU major. So I've taken sustainable development.
CU?
CU, it's like the environmental and urban studies major.
Okay.
That got revamped a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, so I've taken like some stuff on urban development, and yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Tell us just a sentence or two about architecture, because we have no architecture school. Normally you train master's degree people, and then a handful now of PhDs, and I've been involved supervising some PhD people in architecture and planning at IIT, and we had a meeting for the year, a whole faculty meetings for a year, to how can we do architecture on this campus, and the basic conclusion was we should do it as part of a big general civilizational social theory, sort of like Committee on Social Thought. But how have you experienced architecture on this campus?
It's very, I would say, like you said, there's not really any developing curriculum, which is, you know, like, based on the fact that there's no architecture major, it's hard to kind of plan a pathway and have a very overarching sense of like what I'm learning in context of like all of architecture as a whole. So I think like at this school at least, my experience in architecture has been very introspective into like very specific scenes and very specific settings. Like I took a class on the Chicago Park District. So, and then like there's a class on children in architecture, which kind of focuses on like the lens of how you play within architecture. So I think I'm getting very specific like puzzle pieces of the broader picture, which I do enjoy, but it also, like it kind of gives me that liberal arts college sense of architecture, I think.
But in a sense, it does not have what the faculty talked about of something that might be, say, in the MAPS program. They have some required courses about social science and big social science theories, and you read Max Weber and Schills and Martin, Dirkman, and so forth, and Adam Smith. That is, in a sense, is like the college. I mean, college has a college counterpart of civilizational and one called power put on. I mean, and so these have a part of general education, but it linked to bigger general theories. And so I'm surprised that there's nothing like that which you are required to take. Are there any requirements?
No.
Or for the month?
It's a specific number of courses, but you can take anything within them. So I've taken, like I think the SIGU major probably helped a little bit because I took sustainable urban development, which isn't required for the minor at all. But I think that started to go into some of the social theories and social thoughts. Like we read something from Max Weber, and then we talked about Jane Jacobs and like some of the foundational theorists. So that definitely helps me construct a foundation. But within the minor, it's very unstructured.
Okay, well, the other thing you're reminding me, I have made a couple of presentations, and there have been maybe 20 plus faculty who make presentations that somehow links with architecture. And I think those have been cross-listed. I think some of my courses are called architecture. They have an architecture number in there or something like that. Okay.
I think this one does.
Okay. So you're telling me I didn't even realize this. So I'm teaching an architecture course. Okay, so it's good that you're telling me what I'm asking. What should I do? Okay. All right, so that's useful. And let me just add one more footnote in answer to you to yourself here. Two PhD students at IIT, both working simultaneously on PhD theses, were looking for ways that they could use the planners, and how could planning ideas be used to contrast different perspectives within architecture and planning. So they have in mind that the two that they really know and think about a lot is Mies van der Rohe and Jane Jacobs. So if you've got Jane Jacobs up here is something to come to, and then now you got a bit after Jane Jacobs. But what they went back to was Frank Lloyd Wright, the school of Mies van der Rohe, and many and then of course going back to say in medieval Europe to the Gothic architecture and structure. I mean that kind of thing coming forth. One thing which they did, which was nice, was to have the names of these architects or planners, and then down the side, this was an idea we came up discussing this together, was to have a matrix with maybe 20 dimensions that are discussed by Frank Lloyd Wright or by different kinds of planners. And so then so we could say, so Frank Lloyd Wright, would he emphasize the environment, nature, egalitarianism, children, shopping, clean air, transportation, density, and these kinds of things, and where they would be treated within each of in many cases, these architectural people would write treatises. books, statements, officially how it should be done. And they were very strong-minded, many of these people. And so in a sense, what they tried to do was to build a framework for looking at the theories of planning that go back for 100 years or so, and to Haussmann. So Paris with Haussmann, then coming up to the more and more egalitarian, more decentralized kind of Jane Jacobs. So I showed you Haussmann, and then at the end, as a footnote to Haussmann, is New York. So New York was zero planning compared to Paris. And so I just for the record, I should mention the lead, probably considered the lead architect today in the world is a Dutchman, and he built all kinds of things in most of Europe, but his PhD was in England, and it was on the city which he liked to call New Amsterdam, because he was Dutch. Okay, the city founded as New Amsterdam was, of course, the Dutch city, but then it came up to present, and so his basic point was there's never been a plan, and so he will, in his PhD, I will write the plan of New York as if it were planned from the beginning and show you where and how the pieces come together. And so so he's a brilliant, and so he's been teaching at Harvard for maybe 10 years, but he's teaching on condition that he only wants to do this kind of theorizing. He does not want to build buildings in America or have an legion of people here. Whereas Mies van der Rohe came to Chicago, the other branch, his partner, the two lead Germans, one went to Harvard, one went to MIT, and with them they created Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, have roughly 3,500 staff, mostly architects, and they build steel and glass skyscrapers in Brazil, in Italy, in China, Japan, all over the world. SOM is doing this stuff. Students, in a sense, trained by Mies van der Rohe. The Harvard people, not at all, not much less. But what he did not want to do, the kind of building of those buildings with his imprint on them. And so he wants to theorize, and he acts a little bit like a guru. He speaks like a religious guru Indian figure than an architect. So,
What's the name of the Dutch architect?
yeah, okay, so very Dutch name. So, well, you can look it up. His most famous PhD revised is
Is it Brown Koolhaas?
yeah, Rem Koolhaas. That's it, Rem Koolhaas, and the title is something like is it Terrified New Yorkers? Something like that. New York, terrified New York. It's not quite terrified, but it's a word almost like that, not so extreme.
Delirious?
Delirious New York. Delirious New York. That's the book. Okay, it's a brilliant book. Damn good book. But the way he does it, and I'm sort of mentioning it that you, I mean, if no one's giving you a course like this, I'm telling you what you ought to know if you're a PhD student at IMG. Read and one thing, and I went there, and I wanted to get to know the faculty, I wanted to get to know the students, I wanted to see, because clearly the architecture is part of scenes. So the scenes has a physical part, and nobody in sociology knows or cares about the physical part. So I tried to figure out how it so I'd ask them, what should I read? Rem Koolhaas, Delirious New York, best book around. So I never heard of it, but I read it and it's damn good. But so it has such things as the safety elevator, and the invention of the safety elevator meant, and plus, of course, the skyscraper was invented in Chicago, not New York. They built a lot of those things in New York and Manhattan. But the other things they had, so Chicago has the grid system of blocks, and so Washington, D.C. is the exception, but New York had a grid system for numbering the streets. So he went through a series of things like this, which could be physical and planning, but he also got to the values and the feelings of the participants. That is interesting. So the first chapter of the whole book is not about, it's about, guess what? Coney Island. Why Coney Island? Anybody have a clue? Coney Island is an amusement park out in Long Island, 20, 30 miles from Manhattan. And people would go there to get away from the bustle and the hustle and the aggressive competitiveness of Wall Street and this and that. And so I have a Dutch visitor. A Dutch visitor came, and we spent a summer working together, going over all this stuff with Tocqueville and Putnam and so forth. And we reanalyzed the data from them. And we found that Putnam was wrong. He left out the R's. And this was Peter Achterberg. Peter Achterberg said, I went to Coney Island, and I saw people up there, and he said, if you want, you can rent a rifle, and you can, it's a little booth, and you can point the rifle. I'm not supposed to aim it any other place else. You can aim it in the images that were up there, and the guy, the hustler was up there saying, shoot the geek! Shoot the geek! Shoot the geek! And people were lining up. Come shoot the geek. You don't hear? I never heard that in Chicago. Especially in Hyde Park. So that's Dutch can teach us. They teach us about ourselves. Okay. Read the New Yorker. Other themes. What we can talk about in as much detail as you like about any of the readings. I can say a word or two, but not.
Oh, yeah, because it's about 6, so we got like 20 minutes-ish left.
It's 5:45.
No,
Okay.
that clock hasn't moved a single time.
Oh, it hasn't. The
No.
clock is not working at all.
No, it's super broken.
Okay. I'm sorry. Right. Indeed, it's 5:57. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to have some administrative updates. So the majority of you should have gotten your midterms back by now. Not everybody, but the majority. And so, yeah, if there's any questions about that, I know I've already gotten a couple questions about it, and so I've been trying to respond to those. But yeah, everybody did really well, pretty much. So yeah, I was really happy with how everything turned out. I think Professor Clark was too. Seems like you guys have really been engaging with the material well and, learning a lot. And so yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. The only thing I would say was for a lot of people, there was room to sort of expand on your answers. But for the most part, everybody got their information right. It was just, we wished it would have been a little bit more. So yeah.
The power behind the scenes right there. Okay.
But yeah, so the final exam will take the same sort of form as that. It'll be pretty much the exact same thing. We do expect you, because you have a longer time on the final exam, to sort of do more and be able to expand on those questions more. And I think the questions that we're going to have for the final exam will give you more of an opportunity to sort of write more. But yeah, so the final exam should be, we look on the registrar, it should be on the registrar's website. I think we're going to go with the idea that the class is a 3:30 class, because nobody else will have classes during that time, so please schedule accordingly. Just because we don't require people to come to class doesn't mean everybody can take the final exam whenever. And it'll be really important for everyone to be able to take the exam at the same time.
Do we know the day of the week yet?
Yeah, it'll be Friday.
So Friday of the exam week it's the 9th or the 10th week?
It's 10th week.
10th week.
Yeah,
so
Friday,
Friday, 10th week. At what time?
It should be in the morning. I can look it up really
Morning.
quickly.
Okay. So I've tried to find this stuff, and I couldn't find anything myself in the past. So I asked you to find it, and you found it.
Yeah, it's at it'll be from 12:30 to 2:30.
Okay.
So that's really important. I don't think we're allowed to. It makes it really difficult with seniors because seniors will have to have those grades by Sunday, which is a really short turnaround, especially for me. So maybe we'll send out an announcement. Right now we're kind of basing it on the assumption that the seniors are gonna take everything at the same time and then I'll just have a heavy grading weekend. But if that changes, then we'll send an announcement out to the whole class about when seniors should be able to take that exam. But the exam's gonna be the same format where you can take it wherever. So, if your flight is before Friday, then that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah?
Would that be the 24th?
Yes, I think so. If that's the Friday of 10th week, then yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what the final exam should look like, is going to look like. The next couple of weeks of class I think are going to be the same as they've been. We'll probably have a review session on the class of 9th week, so the week before the final exam, so that people can come with questions and can, have anything they want to say and ask before the exam. But yeah, I think that's everything I have to say about that right now. So if does anybody have any questions right now? Nope. No questions.
Okay, good.
So yeah, other than that, I know probably a lot of people came, or
No.
some more people came today, probably looking to speak to us after class. So I don't know if maybe we want.
That's fine if anybody does, and thank you for. I think it's good for everybody to learn a little bit about architecture and urban innovation and the aesthetics and the presence we can see easily of buildings, a visible, clear part of the scene where there's lots of innovation in them. We've used it also to contrast how the mayors and the leaders in Beijing, in Hong Kong, in Paris, and New York have had very different kinds of things that they've done, which reflect the national cultures, the specific histories, the events like the Olympics or Houston, and then in all these cases, look at Jane Jacobs. The chief planner, the guy who was the activist as Robert Moses. Everybody always thought what Robert Moses wanted to do, he did. Well, Jane Jacobs stopped him, and so there was no freeway, which he tried to build. Okay, so Jane Jacobs is now the heroine of many of the so-called new urbanism planners and architects around the world. Okay, so not to say there's one. Let me quickly mention one or two things. Why is Japonica Brown Saraceno twice? Anybody look at that? What's the big message from her? Similar to what I just said about Beijing and elsewhere. How about the relation between a nation and the student movement or specific activities in one city? Like Ithaca, New York, small town, not Chicago's big and complicated. Ithaca sounds pretty small and straightforward. Portland, Maine. Somewhere else, I forgot where it is. And a city in California on the beach, a beachy California place. And what did she study in them in contrast in them? She earlier studied part of Chicago. Okay, I'm not sure, but that's maybe in one of the. Oh yeah, she's had. I guess this was the PhD. Sure, 2009, right? A neighborhood that never changes. Okay, there are two points that I should make. Her thesis with the first title, Gentrification, Social Preservation and the Search for Authenticity. Okay, The big point of this is the term gentrification is crude and a misnomer, and everybody's been using it for 15 years. She changed the language. She showed that if you say gentrifiers come in and they change the neighborhood because they're from out of, they're not locals. They're gentrifiers. And in Chicago, the term gentrification was, etc., was just another term was promoted and developed early in Chicago by a Chicago Tribune writer called YUP, Young Urban Professionals, YUP. Young urban professionals really were these men, and often put the two together. Gentrifiers are yuppies. They bring an outside culture. There's no local neighborhood specificity that goes back historically or culturally. All they want to be is yuppies. And how do you know they're a yuppie? Because they have the New York Times on their shoulder. They have a Starbucks coffee, which they're carrying there. Maybe they have a dog that they're walking for a few minutes before they go off to work. Okay, that's a yuppie. That ain't much. It's a crude, simple label. So it's a national version, and it's also international. The French still use the term yuppie and bobo. Okay, so these are spreading internationally. So what she does is say, hey, these labels from the outside maybe are good enough for newspapermen, but they're wrong. She went out and she talked to people and basically showed their local culture and many people. So she then studied a neighborhood which was predominantly welcoming women, young women who liked other women personally, in business, and sexually. They were lesbians. And they moved into a neighborhood. I won't say it as maybe individually. I don't know in what specific way, but basically, they moved into a neighborhood in the north side near Woodward Park, and basically did not try to act like yuppies. They did not say, they didn't have signs which said lesbians unite or something at all. They learned what the traditional ethnic background was Swedish. So they learned how to dance Swedish dance. They learned how to celebrate the Swedish historical customs in this ethnic neighborhood from Sweden. And so they were, in a sense, they were gentrifiers. They might have raised the rent by virtue of being able to buy more rent, pay more rent. But they consciously did not want to drive out anybody. They did not want to have gentrifiers driving them out. And so the label gentrification was stupid, she's basically saying. That there were many different kinds of people who can bring different kinds of culture, even if there's maybe a national organization like NOW for women or NOW for gays or something else. Her point, so that if that, and she then has another, she has a Cape Cod city and a place in Maine. Her follow-up paper, which is on the reading list, is then elaborated into a book. Same point, but it goes further. She takes one, not just Swedish movement. She takes the idea of lesbians, and is there a lesbian movement, and what is the lifestyle and the politics and policy of lesbians? She shows by studying themselves, the activist lesbians in these 4 towns, each is totally different. In Ithaca, for instance, to just contrast to in Ithaca, they wore business suits. They had not come out, as you will. They did not act in any way. If you had 4 of these women in business suits having lunch in a restaurant downtown Ithaca, they wouldn't look any different than stockbrokers or lawyers or some of the young professors and so forth. In contrast, in California, the ladies wore bikinis, they would meet on the beach, and they'd flirt fairly openly with each other. Totally different. And her point is, the driver is the local political culture. that city transformed. So it maybe people had these abilities, even if you lived in Ithaca, maybe you had some bikinis as well, but you'd never show them in Ithaca. And conversely, if you lived in that place in California and you moved to Ithaca, you didn't try to change the Ithaca people, you'd get some more nice blue suits. Okay, so in that sense, there's a local urban or a local neighborhood difference. Even a national organization, which people, the New York Times talks all the time, lesbians want this, gays want that. Or the White House talks in those terms. It's too simplistic, and what she's pointing out is you need to look more carefully at the combination of that local area, and then link it potentially to the gays nationally. But there are many, many, many kinds of gays, and there are many, many kinds of lesbians. And so if you look more closely, you can see that. Okay, so I'll look at time again. We've got 10 minutes. Any questions on that?
Yeah.
Comments?
Or anything.
Sorry?
Or anything.
Or
regarding
anything, yes,
force.
or now I'll say a word, and I can either give 1 minute or 2 or 3 minutes on Music City, but most of all, Jennifer Novak Leonard. Okay. The question? No. Okay. Jennifer Novak Leonard was a research assistant here at the Harris School. She did a master's degree, and then she did a PhD at a branch of the RAND Corporation while she was working in Washington. And she worked also with a big New York foundation that made some big grants. And she was always interested in are the arts, I mean, let me back up. Stay away from Putnam. It's not just Putnam. This was back to the collaborator of the American leading arts sociologist, was at Vanderbilt, and he wrote about the national style of country music and how country music developed through the media. The American, so in a sense, that's his story was that country music was a creation of the media and a sort of the capitalist dynamics of production. Not in a dogmatic way, but that's his general story. At Princeton, Paul DiMaggio, D-I-M-A-G-G-I-O, he wrote a lot on the arts, and he directed, executive director of a major arts and culture center at Princeton. And for 10 years or so, Chicago and Princeton were the only top universities that had an Institute of Culture, cultural center. and I worked with the faculty director of that was Larry Rothfield, and the other guy really was more key for raising money. And so we had enough money to fund Dan Silver, who was a grad student, and so was Jennifer Novak Leonard, etc. So so then there was a new appointment of the chairman of the board of the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. And I think the president was Bill Clinton, who named him. And his name, or his background was, he was the head of the Broadway theaters. That is the commercially very viable, very big business of all these people who'd come from London or New York or California. They'd go to New York to see the Broadway shows. Gilbert, not Gilbert, that's the English. You know what Broadway musicals are. But basically, they came to so then he was looking at some numbers. What's the budget for the NEI? This is tiny. We don't have a budget. This is a tiny organization. He was thinking bigger with Broadway and more stuff. So he worked with the chief of staff, I think, of the NEA, who I'm still working with today, and the chairman of the board of the NEA, and they went around to all of the major agencies of the federal government, the Defense Department, the NIH, to the hospitals, the Secretary of Education, said, wouldn't you like to have more of the art, or would you like to have more of the arts in your ministry if we were in China? And virtually all of them said yes, but show us how we can justify the money for our budget with the Congress and with the media and everybody else. If you can show us how to do this, we'll do it. I left out one stage that Paul DiMaggio had been doing evaluations for about five to 10 years. And basically his numbers had been showing that the arts have been going down. Fewer and fewer people are going to museums, to opera, to museums, to ballet, and the same thing, or the same story from Pierre Bourdieu. He and DiMaggio had this up-down, down with the arts, and high culture fighting with the people. What she did, so we then here in Chicago we had the challenge was put out. The funds were made available. There were about 6 reports to review and analyze the same issues which Paul DiMaggio had been looking at, and they about 4 of them came up with different ways, slight variations of DiMaggio. Jennifer Novak said the opposite. She said your whole methodology is wrong. You're not measuring the right things at all. You shouldn't just look at museums. How about gospel? How about jazz? How about hip hop? How about women who embroider and make quilts together? How about asking people, do you listen to things on the radio? Did you listen to Elvis Presley or Madonna or these other people later on? Did you see this on television? You ask that, and if you start with the first, the traditional measures of the foundational high art, these were maybe 20% of Americans do this ever. If you do it her way, 60% of Americans are engaging in the arts all the time. They listen on the radio, they watch television, they dance, and so forth. So if you look, and so having those numbers, they then went to the Department of Defense, they went to the President, they went to the White House, and then they raised so much money from the private foundations and corporations that the executive director became the director of a whole new agency. It's a private corporation, private activist group for the arts to advance the arts with, and it had an 8-year duration, and he's just finished that, really waving with his laurels, and he's doing other stuff with MacArthur, and I've been talking with them and so forth. But my simple point is, Jennifer Novak's research came with her sense of being here in Chicago as a student. Don't take the established answers that the other people have been giving for 10 years. Think about it yourself. Ask, and basically she's added also popular, what was called in those earlier years, popular culture, and put it all together. In the same years, the same happened in France. Bourdieu's main collaborator went to Passeron, he went to Marseille, and they do popular culture, fighting against Bourdieu in Paris. So we have the same things have happened. We're getting an eclectic mix of these content of culture, arts, etc., in ways that the classes no longer help interpret the way they did. And the planners, even in Japan and China and Korea, are no longer just top down. They're listening to average people, and they're looking for ways to be responsive to, including, that's why I'm interested, as I said, in student leaders. Okay, so I'll end there as our